This week, we're going to do something a little different, because we have been for the past months, been going chapter by chapter in the scriptures, explaining the history. But now we're at a point in the scriptures where the kingdom has ended for both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, right? So we're going into who took over the northern kingdom, and that is the kingdom of Assyria, right? The Assyrian Empire, all right? And the origins of the Assyrian Empire go all the way back to Genesis 10. So we're going to talk about that real quick. And then we'll get into the actual list of kings and things like that. All right? So we're going to start here in Genesis 10 and verse 8. And Cush begat Nimrod. And Nimrod is a very important figure when discussing not only Assyrian but Babylonian history as well. All right, Nimrod, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. So one of the first lessons, or I believe the first Bible History 101, we talked about the ancient Babylonian Empire. And this is the one that Nimrod started. All right, Babel. And Erech in archaeology, that's known as Uruk, and Akkad with K's instead of C's, and Calneh in the land of Shinar, or Sumer is what they call it. All right, out of that land went forth Ashur. All right, and we're gonna talk about that Ashur. All right, so out of the same land of Babylon, there was also Ashur, which became the Assyrian Empire, and builded Nineveh. That was the capital. That was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, was Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Calah and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah. The same as a great city. All right, so now we'll skip down because it said Ashur. Ashur came out of the same land as the Babylonians. All right, so when you jump down to the Shemites, verse 21 here in Genesis 10. Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam and Ashur. All right, so the second born of Shem was Ashur. All right, he inhabited that city that Nimrod built, and that's where his people populated, was Ashur. All right, so that's where we first hear of the Assyrians. Now let's get into the history. All right. So here we have Assyria, ancient kingdom in Mesopotamia. All right, here's what it covered. And I wonder if you'll be able to see it better like this. Yeah, you'll be able to see it better with me over here. All right. So here you see, here's ancient Sumeria, down here at around the Persian Gulf, modern day Kuwait. And then you have Assyria, and Ashur is on the bank of the Tigris. All right, but they took over this whole region from South Iran to Egypt. All right, all the way up into Turkey and Cyprus as well. All right, so let's go back. It says, Assyria, kingdom of northern Mesopotamia, that became the center of one of the great empires of the ancient Middle East. It was located in what is now northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey. So they're just talking about initially. It was just in this northern section where you see Assyria. All right. A brief treatment of Assyria follows. All right, so we're just going to read this briefly and we'll skip to something else. It says, Assyria was a dependency of Babylonia and later of the Mitanni kingdom during most of the second millennium BC. All right, so that's like from 1999 BC up until the year 1000. That's the second millennium. It emerged as an independent state in the 14th century BCE, so the 1300s BC. And in the subsequent period, it became a major power in Mesopotamia, Armenia, and sometimes in northern Syria. It said Assyrian power declined after the death of Tukulti-Ninurta I. That was like the 1200s BC. This 14th century to the 1200s BC, that's around the time of the judges. All right, so after Egypt had lost the bulk of its power. It took a great blow in the Exodus. And around the same time that the Israelites were trying to establish themselves, you had the Assyrians in Mesopotamia trying to establish themselves. All right? Said it was restored briefly in the 11th century BCE by Tiglath-Pileser I. All right, now the 11th century BCE would be around the time of like David, right, and Saul. But during the following period, both Assyria and its rivals were preoccupied with the incursions of the semi-nomadic Aramaeans. Right, the Aramaeans are the Syrians that you read about in the Bible that David whooped. All right. The Assyrian kings began a new period of expansion in the 9th century BCE. That's like the Assyrian heyday is like when you get to the 9th century to the 7th century rather. From the 9th century BC to the 7th century BC. So like the 800s to the 600s is when Assyria really became the empire that we knew it to be. All right. And since we're done with that photo, I might can move myself back just so y'all can see this a little easier. All right. 9th century BCE, and from the mid-8th to the late 7th century BCE, a series of strong Assyrian kings, among them Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, Sennacherib, and Esarhaddon, united most of the Middle East from Egypt to the Persian Gulf under Assyrian rule. It's funny because this is Britannica, and they speak so highly of the Assyrian Empire, right? It doesn't even really seem objective. It seems like they have admiration for the Assyrian Empire to these Brits, and we'll dig a little bit more into that a little later. But it says the last great Assyrian ruler was Ashurbanipal, but his last years and the period following his death, in 627 BCE are obscure. All right, so remember the date 627 BCE. That was the end of the reign of the last great Assyrian king. I'll put it like that. All right. The state was finally destroyed by Chaldean-Median coalition in 612 to 609 BCE. All right. And a lot of that was done by the father of Nebuchadnezzar. I think his name was Nabopolassar. In that Chaldean-Median coalition. And the Babylonians were the next in power up, and then it was the Medes and the Persians. So it makes sense that a Chaldean-Median coalition is the one who took out the Assyrians. All right? It said, famous for their cruelty and fighting prowess, the Assyrians were also monumental builders, as shown by archaeological sites at Nineveh, Ashur, and Nimrud. See, they had a city named after Nimrod. That's how influential he was. All right. They had Ashur, the city named after their forefather, and then they had Nimrud, not their forefather, but a builder of cities in the region. They named after him. All right. So we can. I kind of want to keep this map around, so we'll keep the map around. But the rest of this, we ain't too worried about. But it said the cruelty of the Assyrians. Now, I tried looking for sources on this, but for some reason, the official sources, like Britannica, doesn't like to talk about the extent of the cruelty. They will mention that it was there, but they won't go into the details of it, right? Which I found odd. No source that would be reputable really went into it. All right, it was just like blog spots and things like this. So this is a blog spot, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's also it also provides sources down at the bottom, and it's also one of the few sources that I can even find on the subject. All right. It says, cruelty, the instrument of Assyrian control. The new Assyrian Empire was the most powerful kingdom that dominated the Middle East during the early first millennium BCE. For 400 years, they illustrated power and control like no other. Their borders stretched from Mesopotamia to parts of Asia Minor, Egypt, and Iran. Under their rule were numerous various people with different languages and culture. A secret to their success was their distinguished guts for brutality and cruelty. All right, so that's something that the Assyrians were unique for, at least at that time. It says, how cruel were the new Assyrian kings? What were their reasons? And finally, what were the effects of such cruelty they exemplified? We're probably not going to read all of this, but at least some of it. Many kings of the Assyrians had displayed, and that's another thing about a blog spot. It's the grammar errors. So please excuse the grammar errors in this article. Many kings of the Assyrians had displayed proudly their cruelty towards their enemies, sometimes in reliefs, and we'll get into some of them reliefs later too, that they wrote on their obelisks and their walls, or in their annals. New Assyrians gave detail of their gory exploits against their opponents. King Ashur-nasir-pal, yeah, so that would be this guy right here in this relief. Ashur-nasir-pal laid out many of his sadistic activities in one of his annals. He liked burning, skinning, and decapitating his enemies. When he defeated a rebelling city, he made sure they pay a huge price. Disobedient cities were destroyed and razed to the ground with fire, with their wealth and all material riches taken by the king, right? So whenever a city didn't want to pay their taxes or whatever, he would show up, take everything that they had valuable out of the city, and kill everybody, burn it all to the ground, right? Because they just didn't care. Right? They wanted to show their strength by brute force. Their youth and women were either burned alive or made into slaves or placed into the harem. In the city of Nistun, Ashur-nasir-pal showed how he cut off the heads of 260 rebelling soldiers and piled it together. Their leader, named Bubu, suffered horrific punishment. He was flayed, and his skin was placed in the walls of Erbil. All right, so flayed is like ripping the skin off. Right, or like even doing it slowly. It doesn't have to be like quick, and they probably did it very tortuously, very slowly. Peeled his skin off. All right. In the city of Suri, rebelling nobles were also skinned and were displayed like trophies. All right. Some skin were left to rot, but some were placed in a stake. Officials of the city suffered decapitation of their limbs. The leader of the Suri rebellion, Ahayababa, underwent flaying, and his skin was then placed in the walls of Nineveh. So they liked that peeling the skin off thing. That really got their rocks off, apparently. After Ashur-nasir-pal defeated the city of Tila, he ordered to cut the hands and feet of the soldiers of the fallen city. So cut their hands and their feet off. So they are either going to bleed to death or they're going to live a very torturous life, very miserable life. Other than that, some soldiers found themselves without noses and ears. They would chop off the nose, or they would chop off the ears. All right? But also, many defeated soldiers had their eyes gouged out. The heads of the leaders of the Tila were hanging in the trees around the city. Right? So they wanted to make an example of you. They would hang you by a tree and leave you there, so that nobody else got any ideas. It said Ashur-nasir-pal was not alone in having a psychotic mind. Many of his successors followed his brutality towards his enemies. Ashur-nasir-pal, as we read, is just like what they consider the first great king of Assyria, right? That's what we read in the Britannica, right? They said Ashur-nasir-pal was the first like great king, right? No, excuse me. It says Tukulti-Ninurta was. Excuse me. Anyway, I wonder if he's in this list, and that's where I got his name from. Yeah, Ashur-nasir-pal II, right here. We'll get back to that list a little later. But let's get back to it. The cruelty. All right. Many of his successors followed his brutality towards enemies. Shalmaneser III had 20,500 enemy soldiers killed by arrow fire. Rebelling cities were dug up and burned with fire. Usually surrounding towns of the unlucky city also suffered the same fate, right? So even the suburbs, y'all gonna get it too, right? They did not care. They just wanted to show their strength by brute force. Shalmaneser III and cruelty, of course. Also illustrated in his relief and carvings how he burned the children of defeated cities, right? So they didn't spare the young nor the old, all right? Sound familiar? Moreover, he ordered the beheading of the soldiers of disloyal cities and made a pyramid from the heads at the gates of the defeated cities. All right, so it's just like Ashur Paul, pile up the heads of your defeated enemies that you cut off. Right. One time after he defeated the rebelling city of Arzasku, he fastened people alive in the pyramids of heads alongside with a pole, which had also alive captured soldiers dangling. Right. So they would trap you inside this pyramid of heads that they're building. Right? How lovely. And he would also dangle others in that same position. It was just like put a whole bunch of like prisoners or captives, whatever, in that pile of heads, and then just drive them through the stake. Make sure they don't go nowhere. Crazy. Like I would never be able to think of crap like that. All right. It said during Tiglath-Pileser III, during his reign, I suppose, the Assyrians began to practice a somewhat psychological brutality, deportation. All right, and that's exactly what happened to the Israelites, and it's going to say that. It was difficult and painful for a conquered people to be taken from their homelands and be brought to a new environment. They had to undergo a huge task of adapting to the new area they were placed in. Deportation of the vanquished continued after Tiglath-Pileser III, right? So these Assyrian kings, they would take which ideas they liked the best from their previous rulers, and that's common to do, but in their case it was the methods of brutality and torture. All right. King Sargon II mentioned the people that suffered deportation under his rule. The people of Commagene were defeated, hence its people suffered deportation to another part of the empire, but Commagene was then occupied by another group of deportees from Bit Lakin. So you see that right there. So they would take people from a specific land, place them in a different land, and then place those people in that land and just mix up everybody. All right. Let's see. Bit Lakin. It was also during the time of Sargon II that 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel were lost due to deportation, right? So they say, oh, they just disappeared, right? They're just gone forever. Under King Sennacherib, the Kassites and the people of the Yasubigali were moved to Hardishbi and Bit Kubati. So I want you to notice this. These other people, it told you exactly where they went and who they got replaced with and all of that. But the 12 tribes of Israel, oh, we just don't know. We just don't know what happened to those 10 tribes. They just lost. They were just lost. Even though we're about to read in the Bible where they were placed. And of course, later you read in 2nd Esdras about how they came together, took counsel, and then came over here. But we ain't getting into all that right now. We'll get into that down the line. All right. So let's keep reading. It says, the intellectual king Ashurbanipal also had a share of cruelty. Although he was known for his great library in Nineveh, he was not as merciful as he seemed. So people like to look back on this guy as a man of intelligence, but he was not a man of mercy. All right, people like to look at his collection of books and not the amount of torture that he did to people. All right, and Ashurbanipal, I believe, was the last one, right? The last great Assyrian ruler, was Ashurbanipal. All right. Let's say, although, not as merciful as he seemed. One time, an Arabian leader named Uwate, I guess it was Uwate, instigated a rebellion. Ashurbanipal managed to defeat Uwate and captured him and brought him back to Nineveh. There, he brought upon him a humiliating punishment. He was tied like a dog and placed in a kennel alongside with dogs and jackals guarding the gates of the great Assyrian capital of Nineveh. So, as much as it was this Ashurbanipal's mind to study, he also studied torture. He also studied psychology. He studied on how to break the mind of his enemies, as he did to this Arab man. All right. And this is more like a thesis right here, closing paragraphs. The Assyrians had reason for displaying such terrific levels of cruelty to the vanquished. We didn't even get into everything that they do, because there's things in reliefs that we're going to look at to show exactly what they did. All right. It all came down to political control. All right. Once the Mesopotamian region was made of numerous independent city-states, the mindset of being an independent entity remained in the minds of many people in the region for centuries. Even with an existing central power, the mindset cannot be removed. Hence, empires tended to establish client-state system where the city-state must pledge their allegiance and pay tributes in exchange for their cooperation. And we're going to see that here in a minute when we look into the scriptures about how these different Assyrian kings interacted with the kings of Israel and Judah. All right. Exchange for the cooperation. However, this meant that rulers had chances to rebel against and becoming once more independent and free from their overlords, right? Because you can't oppress a people forever. Eventually, they will rise up. All right. Thus, rebellions normally occurred during the time of many empires, including the New Assyrian Empire. The New Assyrian kings tried to avoid it with psychological warfare. Displaying brutality towards rebelling cities was a message to others not to mess with the Assyrian. All right, you see that right there? Perhaps that's why the British find these guys so appealing. They wanted to expound, once you rebel and you're defeated, your riches, children, and your women will suffer humiliation and painful deaths. Your city would disappear and you would suffer a terrible death. Deportation also had the equal political message. Rebellion meant losing your homeland, your land, and probably your identity and way of life. You see that right there? So that's why they deported people, to change their entire way of life. All right? Stop being an Israelite, become an Assyrian. We're going to place you in the cities of the Medes, become like the Medes. Alright? It says, with cruelty meant to show that the Assyrian kings had absolute power. It was a way for them to consolidate their power by bringing fears of the horrors and of the consequences of defeat in the hand of the Assyrian army. It's giving them a message to submit or to suffer in the most sadistic way possible. Although in modern times it is seen as barbaric, but the Assyrians needed to do so to keep control of their empire. The brutality of the Assyrian kings led to their expansion and their existence for over 400 years. The heyday of that was like maybe 200 years. Yeah, you could even argue that. But from there, because it did mention how like people had to join the Assyrians in allegiances if they wanted to, keep their system going, keep their region or their state going, right? So, and just so we know some of the cruelty, let's look at some of this real quick. You see, like, they're clubbing the people right here. They're clubbing the people to death. Right here, they're throwing them to the lions and all that kind of stuff. And here you see, this is what it didn't mention, was impaling. They would impale a man or a person by the ribs and then force them up to these stakes so that slowly you slide down and it slides into your lungs or your heart or wherever they placed it, right? And here you see the flaying of these men right here. This is in Lachish, and we'll get into that a little bit later once we get into it. But you see how they're flaying them. They're peeling their skin off. They're pulling them apart, quite literally. All right, so this is the type of cruelty that they would do. You see another example of the cruelty, how they're like smashing their heads in, they're pulling them apart. That's the type of stuff that they would do. All right. So we'll get out of this one and we'll go to the scriptures. Let's go to 2 Kings. And this is when you first start to see 2 Kings 16. This is when you first start to see Assyria as a big deal, as like a problem, right? As in 2 Kings 16. And I guess we'll get the context. We'll read through like verse 10 or so. We've read this here recently, but I want to go back over it because we're not going to touch on everything and go into detail on everything, but just understanding where the Assyrians come into play in the scriptures, right? This is Bible history 101. That's what we care about first and foremost. We're not necessarily too concerned with the Assyrians and what they've done, all right? 2 Kings 16, starting in verse 1. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. All right, so Ahaz, very wicked. He was the son of Jotham in Judah. All right, very weak-minded as well. Didn't have any faith in God. 20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God, like David his father. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, yea, and made his son to pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel. Right? He worshipped Molech, all right, and other Canaanite gods. And he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places, and on the hills, and under every green tree. Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war. Right? So this is the northern kingdom and the Syrians coming to Jerusalem to battle the Judites, all right, the Jews. And they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome it, right? They couldn't destroy the wall. They couldn't get into the city, all right? At that time, Rezin, king of Syria, recovered Elath to Syria and drave the Jews from Elath. And the Syrians came to Elath and dwelt there unto this day. Let's see if we can find Elath. You know we like the maps on this channel. On Bible History 101. we love the maps here, alright? So let's see if we can find Elath. I like to use this one because this pretty much has all the cities. Let's see. Do you want to see Elath? If we ain't going to find it on this one, we're probably not going to find it. So I imagine Elath has to be somewhere around in here. In Bashan, maybe? Could be over here west of the Jordan. But just the way that it speaks of it, the way that Syrians come and got it, it seems like it should be over here east of the Jordan. But maybe I'm tripping. Maybe I just don't know. That's very possible too. You got Idri out here. Golan up here. Bezek. Perhaps it is in Judah. That would make sense too as to why it belonged to Judah. But I was thinking it was something that Judah took from Syria. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not seeing it on here. Very possible that it's not on here. But it's always possible that I'm just looking over it. My eyes are not the best. I ain't gonna act like they are. Yeah, unfortunately not seeing it right now. Oh well. Let's get back to it. This is the point that I wanted to get to. Verse 7. It says, So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. Now, just according to time frame, this would have to be Tiglath-Pileser III. Alright, this one that you see right here. This is when, I guess you could say, Ashurnasirpal was like the one who was reviving the Assyrian Empire. But really, what we first see in the scriptures, as far as their prominence coming towards the Mediterranean, is Tiglath-Pileser III, also known as Pul, P-U-L. And you see his reign right here. Alright? So let's keep that in mind. He said, he sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. Right? So this Ahaz is very weak in spirit. Instead of praying to God, he sent to pray to Tiglath-Pileser. Alright? Saying, save me, oh save me. Tiglath-Pileser. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus, and took it, and carried the people of it captive to Kir, and slew Rezin. Right? So Tiglath-Pileser was actually on the side of Ahaz, because he sent him all of the silver and gold that was from the temple. He said, oh, we don't need these holy artifacts. You can have them. All right? We ain't even doing the services of God. So why do we need these? All right? In verse 10, and King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw an altar that was at Damascus. And King Ahaz sent to Uriah the priest, the fashion of the altar and the pattern of it, according to all the workmanship thereof. Right, so then Ahaz goes to build an altar just like he saw in Damascus in Jerusalem. Right, evidence of his own wickedness. All right, so let's read this here in 2 Kings 17, because this is all on past poll. All right, this is 2 Kings 17 verse 1. I'm gonna start with verse 1. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. All right, Hoshea. But did it say which year of Ahaz that all this happened? 16 years. Came Jerusalem to war. Yeah, so it doesn't say. It doesn't say what year it was of Ahaz's reign. But we do see here that in the 12th year of his reign, that Hoshea began to reign. So it must have been early on in his reign. All right. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Right. He wasn't that bad. Right. Like some of the other kings of Israel were. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria. And this Shalmaneser, let's go back to the list. This Shalmaneser has to be the successor of Tiglath-Pileser III. It has to be Shalmaneser IV, also known as Enemeser. All right. Depending on what you read. All right. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. All right, so he said, look, if you ain't paying me, you go into jail. All right, like what they do with your fines today. But anyway, this is what I wanted to get to. Verse 5. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. So that's all in Iran. All right, just so you know, that's all in Iran. All right. Iraq and Iran, you know, that region. All right, so from there, we read about Tiglath-Pileser and how he destroyed Damascus in league with Ahaz, king of Judah. And here we read about his successor, Shalmaneser IV, taking Samaria, all right, and the northern kingdom with it, all right, as slaves. So let's go to Siege of Lachish, that's Siege of Samaria. I do want to read this real quick. It says, in 720 BCE, the Assyrian army captured Samaria. So the siege took up until 720. All right. Or that's when they were finished, I should say. They finished the siege in 720 BC, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, and carried away many Israelites into captivity. All right. So let's read a little bit more on that. And this is .uk, so keep that in mind. It says, Israel, the house of Omri. The king of Israel was known to the Assyrians after his founder, Bit-Humri, house of Omri. Now, we know that Omri did not establish the northern kingdom, but he did establish Samaria. He did found Samaria and make it the capital of the northern kingdom. So, obviously, when the Assyrians come and took Samaria, they said, okay, this is the house of Omri. We're besieging the house of Omri. Together with the kingdoms of Hamath and Damascus, so that's Hamath and Damascus, both in Syria, it dominated the political landscape of Syro-Palestine in the 9th and 8th century BC, and like them, it eventually fell victim to the Assyrian expansion to the Mediterranean. So let's read a little bit about that. Israel controlled the Mediterranean ports to the south of the Lebanon Range and the rich agricultural lands between the coast of the River Jordan, a strategically and economically profitable position which provided a link between the route networks across the sea and the desert. All right, so yeah, the land was always very strategic. All right, one of the reasons why God gave it to us, because if you run that land from what God had promised Abraham, from the Nile to the Euphrates, then you run the world. All right. It says Israel's relations with Assyria oscillated between neutral, cordial, and hostile. Right, it was different things at different times. The submission of King Jehu before Shalmaneser III of Assyria, 858 to 824 BC, is prominently depicted on one of the central panels of the so-called Black Obelisk, highlighting the importance of this alliance to Assyria. Right, and that's this famous picture right here. Image, new tab. Thank you. Oh, and it's not even going. I hate it when it does that. But anyway, I'll try to zoom in just a little bit. I know it's kind of blurry, but bear with me. This Jehu down here, down there, bowing down to was it Shalmaneser III and his servants. All right. So you can't really see it right there, but Jehu got a big nose, like what you see with some Latinos. All right. Whoa, gotta fix this. There we go. All right. It says, but before the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, which is 744 to 727 BC, the nature of the relationship with Assyria was primarily defined by Israel's rapport with Damascus, its eastern neighbor and main rival in the region. Frosty went in league with Damascus and close whenever the two were at odds. Let's see, we're about to get into it right here. It says Israel was directly affected when Assyria's western frontier was moved from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean coast and the Lebanon mountain range. The year 732 BC saw the first Assyrian invasion of Israel. This event is well documented in the Bible, albeit not from the viewpoint of Israel, but of its southern neighbor, the kingdom of Judah. All right. It is possible to juxtapose this narrative with passages in the royal inscriptions of Tiglath-Pileser III, which, although fragmentary, provide valuable insight into the Assyrian view on the matter. All right, so this was 732 BC. What we read with Ahaz calling out to Tiglath-Pileser III, saying, "Please come save me, Tiglath-Pileser. Oh, I'm a weak little baby." It says the biblical account of the invasion of 732 differs from the Assyrian sources above, all in the motivation identified as driving the Assyrian attack and conquest. According to the Bible, the invaders were brought to Israel by Ahaz, king of Judah, who asked Tiglath-Pileser for a military intervention against Israel and Damascus. I mean, they can both be true. You know what I'm saying? Paul could have got word from Ahaz, like, please come and help us, and then thought about it for a second and was like, well, wait a minute, if I take over Damascus, then that just expands my empire, right? So it could have been mutually beneficial in that manner. All right. And then we just read this is in a different version though. It says, from a Judean perspective, therefore, the Assyrian invasion of Israel was the direct consequence of Judah's vassal treaty with Assyria. In exchange for his loyalty and his tribute, King Ahaz was able to summon his overlord Tiglath-Pileser, who was bound by the treaty to protect his vassal against his enemy's aggression. But again, nowhere in the scriptures does it look like Paul doesn't want to do it, right? I think this list... Oh, excuse me. Press the wrong thing again. I think this list right here lists Shalmaneser IV when it's supposed to be Shalmaneser V. Alright. Yeah, that's what it looks like at least. It says, while not a single original treaty from the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser V, or Sargon II has been recovered so far, the prescriptions of the extant treaties of their predecessors and successors demonstrate that the biblical account describes the relationship between an Assyrian king and his client rulers accurately. So that's exactly what would happen in a situation like that. Even though they can't find proof from Paul's side, they found proof of how the Assyrians moved generally. So they could say, oh, this is likely to have happened legitimately. That's why they can put a date on it and say it happened in 732 BC. All right. I guess we'll read into this a little bit. I ain't really too concerned with it because, again, we read from the Israelite perspective. But we'll we will, bear with them on this one. We will humor them for a second. It said, from an Assyrian perspective, however, the invasion of Israel was part of a much wider military offensive designed to establish political and economic dominance over the routes across the Syrian desert to the harbors of the Mediterranean, right? So there's like I said, there's no reason why it couldn't be both, right? There's no reason why, from the Israelite perspective, it just looks like, Ahaz called Pul and said, look, come do this favor for me, and then Pul did it, when really Pul had this plan going all along. He was going to head that way anyway. He may have done it sooner than he would have, you know what I mean? It says Tiglath-Pileser's previous conquest in northern Syria, in Arpad in 740, in Unku in 738, northern parts of Hamath in 738 as well, had resulted in an Assyrian corridor linking the Euphrates with the northernmost stretches of the East Mediterranean coast. This cut off Syrio-Palestine from the important overland connection to Anatolia and caused an intensification of commercial and consequently political interests in Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula, right? Because if you control that region from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, you control the world, all right? But from an Assyrian point of view, the increased contacts with Egypt and the Arabs endangered its control over the region and therefore constituted high treason. Rezin of Damascus, which apparently in Aramaic he is like Rahianu, of Damascus, and Pekah of Israel, who feature so prominently in the Bible as Judah's enemies, were among the treacherous vassals. That also included Hiram of Tyre and Hanunu of Gaza. On the latter see Philistia. Because Gaza was run by the Philistines at the time. It said, Assyria employed a strategy that was initially aimed at preventing any military invention via Egypt, where the powerful Cushites were increasingly gaining in influence. Right? And you would see that a lot in Egypt, the back and forth between the Mizraimites and the Cushites. The conquest of Tyre and Gaza in 734 resulted in an Assyrian cordon of loyal vassals stretching from the Brook of Egypt to the eastern bank of the Jordan, blocking the land route into Egypt and also into Arabia. Judah, which is not at all mentioned in Tiglath-Pileser's accounts, was one of these vassals. All right. So, and I've mentioned this before of how the other nations will mention the Israelites when it's advantageous to them, and only then will they mention the Israelites, because they know the history of David and how David took over everybody, right? And how that already happened centuries previous. So they don't want to give the Israelites any praise, all right? But whenever they take over somebody who is from the lineage of David, they'll say, look, I've conquered the house of David. Or like, look, I've conquered the house of Omri, as we saw mentioned. Okay. It says it must remain open whether its king Ahaz had allied himself with the Assyrians only in reaction to the capture of nearby Gaza, or whether this had happened already before. Thereafter, the war was thus confined to the north of modern Israel and what is today southwest Syria. It culminated in the Assyrian siege of Damascus and the conquest of this great city in 732 BC. The annexation of the northern part of the kingdom of Israel followed. The events are related briefly in two passages of Tiglath-Pileser's surviving inscriptions. It says, the land Bit Humri, or the house of Omri, all of whose cities I had utterly devastated in my former campaigns, whose people and livestock I had carried off, and whose capital city, Samaria, alone had been spared. Right, during the days of Tiglath-Pileser. However, during the days of his successor, they overthrew Samaria. Now they overthrew Pekah, their king. Right, and we read about it in the scriptures. Plenty of turmoil. There was never one lineage of kings in the northern kingdom. It was always shifting with coups and things like that. All right. The land, Beit Humri, which is the house of Omri, I brought to Assyria, its auxiliary army and an assembly of its people. Their king Pekah, and I placed Hoshea as king over them. All right, and we just read about Hoshea, right? He didn't stay loyal. In 732 BC, the kingdom of Damascus lost its independence and existence, its holdings carved up into Assyrian provinces. Israel, on the other hand, was allowed to survive, albeit reduced to a fraction of its former size and cut off from the sea. Tiglath-Pileser put it under the rule of a new king, Hoshea, chosen to serve as a loyal executor of Assyrian interests, but we see that did not last long. Israel's northern territories came under direct Assyrian rule. The newly established province of Megiddo centered around the city of the same name and included also the coastal regions with the city, all the coastal regions with the harbor of Dor. All right, and we can go back to this map right here because it does mention some of those cities right here, especially Megiddo. And show you the whole region of Megiddo. So here you see the plain of Megiddo. Do we see the city? Or we just see the plain? We see Migdal. And here you see Dor. So that's the region that they're talking about. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing the city of Megiddo. They could just be talking about the plain. Yeah, it looks like they're just talking about the plain of Megiddo, going through the whole Carmel mountain range, going over to Dor. All right. All right. It says, the north of the kingdom was lost, but as long as Hoshea proved himself a faithful Assyrian vassal, the south remained independent. But during the reign of Shalmaneser V, the Assyrian army invaded the kingdom and conquered the city of Samaria. Yeah, so on this list it is supposed to be Shalmaneser V, not the fourth. Apparently the fourth was not very important. He's not listed here alongside the third, and this would be the fifth Shalmaneser. Shalmaneser V. All right. Okay. The Assyrian army invaded the kingdom, conquered the city of Samaria. Because of the very limited range of available Assyrian resources for Shalmaneser's reign, the reconstruction of the events depends largely on biblical evidence, and details are unclear and debated. According to the Bible, Shalmaneser attacked Israel after Hoshea had sought an alliance with So, king of Egypt, possibly Osorkon IV of Tanis, and it took the Assyrians 3 years to take Samaria. 3 years. All right, so as we see here, they finished up in 720. So it could be that they took the whole years of 722, 721, and 720, or it could be they started in 723 and ended up in 720, regardless. In the 8th century BC. All right. We'll get back to this. All right. It was the standard practice of the time to incorporate enemy troops into the conquering forces, but after decades of absorbing defeated enemies, the Assyrians only extended this privilege to a chosen few. A hand-selected 200, later versions 50, chariot crews of the famous Samaritan chariot corps made the cut according to the inscriptions of Sargon II. And as you see there, our people were quick to rise in the ranks of the Assyrian army, all right, because they saw their expertise, and they said, okay, we could really use this on the battlefield. All right. The remainder of the troops were discharged. A number of administrative documents excavated in Calhu demonstrate that Samaritan Chariot Corps was subsequently stationed in that city. Very unusually, in Calhu, it was allowed to retain its group identity and organizational structure, right? So if you're putting all these Israelites together, they're not just going to stop being who they are, right? That's why they would, deport people and put them in certain places, so they would forget that national identity. But if you're putting them all in the army, then, you can't really stop the organizational structure. You can't really stop the continuation of the national identity. All right. This must be due to its specialized expertise, which provide a valuable addition to the existing array of Assyrian battle techniques. They said, normally we would split these people up and, put them in different cities, but we could use their expertise in battle. So what we're going to do, we're not going to worry about stripping their national identity. We're going to let them stay who they are because we need their help in the army. All right. It says, already in the 9th century, the Israelites emerged from the Assyrian sources as master charioteers. They used heavily fortified tank-like chariots, which were drawn by a particularly large breed of horses originating from Cush, Nubia, right? So trade in Africa is how the Samaritans got this way, as far as able to build these sturdy chariots, all right? The Samaritan chariot corps introduced these vehicles and horses to the Assyrian army, and over the following decades, their use and strategic importance increased markedly, so that by the 7th century, it was no longer associated exclusively with the chariot crews of Samaria, right? So there was so much Samaritan influence on the armies of Assyria and Babylon and the Medes and the Persians that they could no longer just call it Samaritan at that point, because it had spread and it became the norm, right? All right. So from there, remember the torture and the cruelty of the Assyrians. We're going to come right back to the kings, but remember the torture and cruelty of the Samaritans. It goes back to Deuteronomy 28. All right. In Deuteronomy 28, and I'm going to try to wrap it up soon, but we're almost done, maybe. In Deuteronomy 28 and verse 15, it says, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. And one of the curses is verse 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. Now we know that this is going into, much later prophecy of like conquistadors and, colonizers and things like that. But I want this next part. It says, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, right? We didn't understand the Assyrian, right? A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. Didn't we read about how these Assyrians would kill the babies? They would kill the babies, and they would chop people's noses off and their ears off. Very similar to what the conquistadors did, all right? The Assyrians just did it first, all right? It talks about him eating up the resources. And that's exactly what they did. They would come to the city and say, give us your resources or we're going to destroy the city. Pledge your allegiance to us by giving us your resources or we're going to destroy the city. All right? So, from there, let's go back to the kings. 2 Kings 18, I believe. I believe it's all in succession right here, talking about these Assyrian kings and their influence on the region. Yes. So this is in Hezekiah's reign, and we've read about Hezekiah before. And even this specific time where Sennacherib comes to try to take Jerusalem, but God does not let him do it. However, let's read this first part. It says, verse 9, and it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. All right, so while that was going on, we were in the 4th reign of Hezekiah. All right, so this was 720-ish BC by the time, or by the time it happened, it would have been 723, 722. All right, that's the 4th year of King Hezekiah. Right, so that means his reign would start in like 726 BC. But he was a contemporary to these Assyrians, all right? Hezekiah was. And at the end of 3 years, they took it. Even in the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken. All right, we saw it was taken in 720. So we see that Hezekiah must have started reigning in 726, perhaps 725. BC. And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel into Assyria and put them in Halah and in Habor by the river Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. And we read about that. Because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant and all that Moses the servant of the Lord commanded and would not hear them nor do them. And we just read that in Deuteronomy 28. All right, so now let's get into this history. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish. saying, I have offended, return from me. That which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. So he said, okay, you want me to leave your land? Pay me. All right, so look what Hezekiah does. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. So instead of having faith in this moment, Hezekiah said, I'm just going to pay you and get out of my land, please. Please don't come mess with us. Instead of trusting in God in this moment, he said, look, well, I have money, so I'll pay you off to not mess with us. But anyway, it said the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, right? Sennacherib. And here we see Sennacherib comes 2 after Shalmaneser, right? It's Sennacherib in the late 600s. Or I guess it would technically be the early 7th century BC. Around then. Alright. You have him taking Lachish. Now the thing about Lachish, I say specifically, is because the Assyrians were very proud of what they did at Lachish. They put that on a lot of their walls. Alright. So I have this pulled up right here. The Assyrian siege of Lachish. Alright. And this right here that you see, and I actually had this pulled up right here, and this is I don't know, it's good to have, I guess, but you just look up the Assyrian siege of Lachish, and a few down, you have the siege of Lachish in 3D, and it actually shows you this part of a wall, this section of a wall that the Brits took from the Middle East. They cut it out of a wall or off obelisk or wherever they got it from. They sprawled it out like this and put it in the British Museum. All right. So these Brits, they really love the Assyrians. They patterned their kingdom, their empire, after the Assyrians when it comes to like the cruelty and the expansionist measures and things like that. They really studied the Assyrians, and they're really fascinated by these Assyrians. All right. But the video itself isn't very good. It's staying on a particular photo or something. But here you see, this is at Lachish. All right, and we looked at it when we was talking about the cruelty a while ago. This is at Lachish. And look at these men. All right, look at their hair. All right, these ain't Jewish people. This is a city of Judah, but these are black men. All right, that's what I want you to notice right here. And these being flayed right here, up on the stake, look the same way. You got these bowing down, look the same way. Look at the hair, it's woolly. All right, bowing down to who did it say? Sennacherib. Yeah. So that's what happened at Lachish. All right, it was Judites. All right. We'll exit out of that. We'll exit out of that. And I do want to read a little bit more on this. Not necessarily what we just read, but how Sennacherib wanted to come against Jerusalem, and he was speaking against the Lord in doing so. All right. Destruction of Sennacherib prophesied. All right. So I'm just going to skip to the point because we already read about this history. I'm just going to skip to the point. This is in 2 Kings 19 and verse 35. And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. That's 185,000 men of war. All right, that the angel of the Lord, went and killed in one night. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh. It came to pass as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adremelech and Sharezer his son smote him with the sword. And they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. As you can see right here, that is the succession of the kings. All right, Sennacherib goes to Esarhaddon in 681 BC. So that was the year that he tried to take Jerusalem. and he had to pay for it because he was speaking all kind of crazy ways against the Lord. Y'all know we read that. All right. So I'll read a little bit about Tobit. I think this actually goes back to Enemesser. All right. Okay, so it says, the book of the words of Tobit, son of Tobiel, the son of Ananiel, the son of Aduel, the son of Gabiel, the son of Asahel, of the tribe of Naphtali, who in the time of Enemesser, so that's Salmanassar V, king of the Assyrians, was led captive out of Tishbe, or Tishbe, which is at the right hand of that city, which is called properly Naphtali in Galilee above Asher. Right, so he is from Asher. He talks about the fall of Samaria. And I'm going to pick up with verse 13. And the Most High gave me grace and favor before Enemesser, so that I was his purveyor. I'm not sure what purveyor means. Let's see purveyor. I think it's like a recorder. Let's see real quick. Purveyor, a person who sells or deals in particular goods, right? So like a supplier or a trader or a retailer, a vendor. Okay, that makes sense. All right. And I went into Media and left in trust with Gabiel, the brother of Gabrias, at Rajas, a city of Media, 10 talents of silver. Now when Enemesser was dead, Sennacherib, his son, reigned in his stead, whose estate was troubled, that I could not go into Media. And in the time of Enemesser the first, gave many alms to my brethren, and gave my bread to the hungry, and my clothes to the naked, and if I saw any of my nation dead or cast about the walls of Nineveh, I buried him. So they would just kill these Israelites for fun and leave them just outside the wall of the city. So when Tobit saw that, he said, oh, I got to go bury my brother, right? It's not a custom of the Jews to leave our dead just lying around in the streets. We have to be in the ground where we came from, right? It said, and if the king Sennacherib had slain any when he was come and fled from Judea, I buried them privily. For in his wrath he killed many, but the bodies were not found when they were sought for of the king. Because as we read, they liked to pile up these bodies and the heads of these bodies in displays, right? They like to kill these people and leave them hanging in trees, or like pile up the heads or whatever as displays of their brutality, right? So nobody else gets any ideas, all right? And when one of the Ninevites went and complained of me to the king, that I buried them and hid myself, understanding that I was sought for to be put to death, I withdrew myself for fear. You see that right there? So, one of these Assyrians that was ethnically of Ashur, he said, "What, you got this Hebrew burying these other Hebrews? He's the one that's doing it right here. Tobit, I found him, right? Being a narc." But these are some very cruel people, man. Very cruel people. Very wicked. They're the Kurds today. That's what they are. They don't even have the Assyrian no more. They're all split. They don't have any kind of like state to call their own. They're all split up. I say good riddance. I don't care. They're the Kurds. Split in like Iraq and Iran and Turkey, maybe even some in Syria, but they're split up in that region. All right. It says the last great Assyrian ruler was Ashurbanipal, but his last years and the period following his death in 627 BC are obscure. And like I said, this kind of like ties into what we're doing next week, the Babylonian Empire, because it says the state was finally destroyed by a Chaldean and Median coalition in 612 to 609 BCE. And see, that is where Nebuchadnezzar's dad comes into play, Nabopolassar. We might read a little bit about him next week, but really we're going to be getting into like Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, all right, and talk about how that really changed the scene in the Middle East at that time, all right, and how it destroyed Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff. So with that, I know we spent a little bit of time on this, but we're trying to talk about hundreds of years right here and put it into like an hour's worth of video, right? So with that, I hope y'all learned something. Man, all praise to the Most High in the name of His Son Jesus Christ that we made it, this far. So with that, I say shalom. Most High in Christ bless.